Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I'm Brian Nemhauser, and it is a fabulous Friday morning, and we've got an awesome show today. I am not exaggerating. It's no hyperbole. I've been looking forward to this conversation more than almost any I've had around the Seahawks offseason, because here's the thing. You guys know that while we've done over 400 shows in the last year on the Seahawks, we're going to get a little rose-colored glasses. We're going to get a little myopic, and we need to have a little bit of a broader perspective brought in. We also need to see if we can potentially inform some of the national perspective. And there's a guy on the Athletic Football Show, Derrik Klassen, who I think is one of the best analysts out there. And it doesn't even matter what my opinion is. He's on the Athletic Football Show with Robert Mays, who you all saw every week with me this past season. You know how good Robert is, and he and Derrik together are honestly the best football podcast for my money out there right now. I don't miss an episode, and we finally were able to connect. And so without further ado, I bring aboard the man formerly mentioned, Derrik Klassen of the Athletic Football Show. How are you doing this morning, Derrik?
I'm doing fantastic. That was an incredibly that was a very kind intro. I don't even know what to say to that. I'm always happy to talk Seahawks. This is weirdly one of my favorite teams to talk about, and it's not just this offseason. They've for years been one of my favorite teams. So very happy to be here. Should be a good time.
Well, you know, if the show goes the right way, you'll be just as happy to talk Seahawks at the end as at the beginning. If it goes the wrong way, you'll feel like I'm just hammering you on Seahawks stuff. So if I get going too hard, just cry uncle, tell me, hey, be a little gentle here. So, Derrik, when I first started, following you, listening to you, a lot of it was about quarterback evaluation. Like that was kind of a specialty, a passion for you. Talk about how you got started, in your work analyzing football.
Yeah. So it wasn't a very traditional start. In high school, I had played soccer for a little bit. And then I think sophomore year, maybe junior year, I just quit playing and I was like, well, I should do something productive. And I had always loved football growing up. So I was like, I'll just watch some draft prospects and see if some random sites will allow me to put my words on their site. And they kind of did. And I realized, okay, doing some draft work can be a good way to continue watching football and do something productive and all that. And just a year or two into doing that, I realized that quarterbacks were the most fun position to watch because, you get your hands on everything. Like even when I grew up, when I was watching baseball, I loved pitchers because they kind of have their hand on everything and they are, kind of pulling all the strings on everything. And so I just enjoyed the position from that sense because, in order to understand playing quarterback, you also have to understand the defense and coverages and how blitzes work and all that stuff. So it felt like a good way to get my hands on everything. And so the more I watched draft prospects, that's what I gravitated to. And then down the line, I realized the NFL was an even higher level in terms of what those guys were being asked to do. And that really pulled me in. So it was mostly just about the fact that being able to touch everything in the game, I thought was such a fascinating thing for me.
What's something that you think the average fan most commonly misunderstands or underestimates about what it takes to be a good quarterback?
That's a great question. I think especially at the NFL level, you have to cut out so much fat in the way that you do things. Like guys in college, you can go 1, 2, 3, get through your drop back. Maybe I'm not super crisp in the way I'm doing it. And the ball's still going to get there because I have a decent arm and my receiver is a 4-star and it doesn't matter. He's going to get open. In the NFL, you see guys who are a little bit slower, whether it's in their release or their operation, that even if they're good players otherwise really struggle to be good. Justin Fields is a good example of this. He's a fantastic athlete, really good arm. I think he generally is a kind of smart player and he's accurate when he's clean. The problem is he's always a half a tick late and he has this slow release. So even though he does all this stuff well, because he's simply not fast enough, it just doesn't work. You go to the other end, you watch a guy like Joe Burrow. Everything Joe Burrow does is incredibly quick. It's incredibly clean. One of my favorite things that Joe Burrow does is he will, at the very last step of his drop back, already be moving his hips to make the throw. It's not there's no extra little hitch step to reset. None of that. It is as soon as my back foot hits, boom, ball's out. And that type of efficiency, you really need it at the NFL level, especially to sustain success.
And on the flip side, what's something that maybe you see that people talk about a lot and they're like, oh, this is the thing with quarterbacks. And you're you've learned over your time that Maybe it's less important than people perceive it to be.
Maybe this is because I loved Cam Newton so much, but completion percentage is just like nonsense. Like it's so much more about in 9 out of 10 cases, completion percentage is more about what the offense is asking you to do and the way that they are trying to operate. Like Jordan Love is another good example. He's a guy who hovers around like 62, 63 completion percentage, which is like not embarrassing, but it's also not great. But it's not because he's inaccurate necessarily. It's because he's always throwing down the field because that's the way the offense operates. That's the way that he likes to operate. And then you look at guys like, the Sam Bradfords, the Drew Breeses, and they can throw down the field. Their completion percentage is so high because they're throwing flat routes all the time. And so accuracy does play into completion percentage a little bit, but like that raw number almost means like nothing to me.
So you and I were talking a little bit before we got on air here, and I'm going to share that with other folks. In that, the goal of this show, as much as it's a show for Seahawks fans about the Seahawks, is to find truth. Like we don't want to be too overconfident and then be super surprised come game day. That hurts for a lot of Seahawks fans. And, generally don't want to be too skeptical because you get a lot of griping about maybe things you don't need to get. So we're in a fact-finding mission here, and you're part of our crew today. And so, Derrik, with that in mind, you had the best words I can use to describe when I heard your reactions to some of the Seahawks' initial offseason moves, especially the trades that they made, was somewhere between flabbergasted, wounded, exasperated. Tell me, how would you describe your reaction to the trade of Geno Smith and DK Metcalf?
Yeah, wounded might be the best word, because to me, Geno Smith is a top 12 quarterback in the league. And I think even I know I'm probably higher on him than a lot of other people, but I think by almost any like objective measure, he is at least a top half of the league quarterback, which those are typically not guys you want to trade. And so to me, I understand that the entire mission of what the Seahawks were trying to do this offseason was retool a little bit and reimagine the offense a little bit and be something different than it was when what they were trying with Grubb in year one of the McDonald era and all that stuff. I don't understand why they couldn't have done that with the better quarterback in Geno Smith, as opposed to what they ended up landing with Sam Darnold. And part of why I was able to eventually come to terms with it is I realized there might have just been some sort of bad blood with him in the front office and just some uncomfortability about, Geno wanting to play for that front office, whatever it was. And so maybe a deal was never going to get done. But I think just looking on paper, like this team would have been significantly better with Geno Smith and DK Metcalf, as opposed to the entire reimagination of what they've done with the offense, I think.
So is that really like the main boulder in establishing your perspective on the Seahawks offseason is that set of decisions?
Pretty much. And it's difficult because, like I said, I believe there probably was some degree of maybe a deal was just never going to get done with Geno. So it's almost unfair to say like, oh, they didn't get a deal done, blah, blah, blah. Maybe it just was never going to happen regardless. So I have tried to shift my perspective more to, okay, viewing the Seahawks offseason purely through the things they did after trading Geno Smith and DK Metcalf. And honestly, from that perspective, I think they have done a decent job of navigating it. It's hard for me to say it was a good offseason overall when fundamentally I don't agree with trading the top 12 quarterback, who I think, especially purely as a like pure drop back passer, not including play action, any of that stuff, is about as good as it gets in this league outside of the, top 3-4 elite guys.
Yeah, and as someone who's been a big supporter of Geno Smith as well, and it's something that Robert and I bonded over across the season as well. But let's say for a second, and I think there's really strong evidence of this, that Geno Smith was not going to sign a contract that the Seahawks were going to offer. The Seahawks were not going to violate a contract principle they've had. People say they weren't going to give him the guarantees that the Raiders gave him. Well, but they didn't give those guarantees in second years to Geno, Russ, DK. Like they don't do, that's just a principle. They don't do that on second years of contracts. And let's assume DK Metcalf did not want to come back. And that was not something the Seahawks wanted both of those people to come back. They did not want to come back. So on one hand, you can say, all right, well, maybe that's not their fault, the Seahawks' fault, so to speak. But I think from your perspective, if I'm hearing right, like, okay, whatever the reason, is the team better or worse? Like, that's kind of the evaluation you have to come to. And you can say why and why not it happened, but is the team better or worse? And so right now, in your evaluation, are the Seahawks better or worse than they were to end last year?
I think they are a worse team. And what's interesting is I actually think they drafted pretty well. Like, I like a lot of what they did in this draft. The problem is I think almost all of the picks they made are not to make the 2025 team better. It is to make maybe the 2026 and 2027 team better, which, if you are living in the world where you are trading away your good quarterback, is honestly a fine way to operate, because like Elijah Arroyo, it's probably not going to play a whole lot this year. But he's insurance for the fact that, like, okay, Noah Fant's contract is coming up, so we're just going to insert him a year down the line. Gray Zabel, I know that he's going to start this year, but an FCS guy jumping up to the NFL level, that might not be a guy who is giving you his best ball immediately. Jalen Milrow, we all know, is like going to be a project, but I liked him and I liked the idea of getting him. And then even Emanwari, I think, might take a year to, given some of his athletic limitations. And I know he tested out of the, just like was tested insane, but I think he's pretty stiff. And so I think it might take a year or two for him to really like ramp up into the league. So I like a lot of what they did for the 2026 and 2027 Seahawks. But I think for this year, I don't know if the defense is that much better, and they're already good, so that's not a huge thing. And then the offense, I just think, took a pretty big step back and is going to be not have as much explosive potential as they had before.
All right, let's take the team in kind of parts and go through this, because part of what I was hoping to do is share some of what I've looked at, what I've understood, and you to be, assess whether or not that makes sense or whether it's rose-colored glasses, and you get to call it out freely as we go along. So let's start with the defense, since I know that's you've been more focused on the quarterback, more focused on the offense. This was a top 10 defense by almost any metric last year. And that included a stretch where they were the worst defense in the NFL during the middle of the year, allowing like historically bad amounts of yardage. They changed over their personnel. Ernest Jones, they put Josh Jobe at corner. They did a couple of things, Kobe Bryant at safety. And over the last 9 games of the season, basically after the personnel changes, they were a top 5 defense across pretty much any metric. So let's just say that they're all they are is a top 10 defense again. The average amount of wins for a top 10 defense since the 2020, last 5-6 seasons, is 10.6 wins. The average amount of wins, and that's just for that metric, not for anything, not controlling for anything else. The average amount of wins for a top 5 defense, a team with a top 5 defense, is 11.3 wins. And so that is a defense that did that against the number 1 toughest schedule of offenses last year. And I got a couple other things I want to tack on, but I'm going to pause there because I'm going to talk the whole show and I want to hear from you. Help me understand maybe, like, why is there not more starting the evaluation of the Seahawks of a Mike McDonald team with the defense?
I mean, that's a great question. And I think you could make the case with McDonald, like, especially when you look at what he did in Baltimore, like what they were able to do in the second half of his first season, kind of like what he was able to do in Seattle. And then obviously in his second season, they were even better than they were before. I think some of the smaller differences for me, for as good as Ernest Jones is, he is not nearly the athlete Roquan Smith was at his peak. And I think that there were certain things that Smith could do in coverage that, even though Ernest Jones is a very smart player in coverage, just doesn't quite have the range. And I do worry that even though they signed DeMarcus Lawrence, which I kind of like as just adding a little bit more beef, a veteran in what is like generally a young group, I still don't feel like they have an ace. The counter to that is they really didn't in Baltimore either, and Mike McDonald has done an incredible job, but I do think that that is always something to bring up with defenses. And I think the last thing for me is the defensive back room. For as much as I love Devin Witherspoon, and I really liked the moving Kobe Bryant to safety, I actually thought that worked pretty well. I was kind of shocked they didn't do a whole lot about giving Josh Jobe a little bit more competition, because I think he's a fine cornerback too when you need him to be, kind of like he was last year. I'm a little bit curious about what that looks like when he's your week 1 starter. And then the other thing is I think I'm just a little bit lower on Emanwari than a lot of other people in terms of him being a year 1 starter. So I still think the defense is going to be good. It's just I think that there are a little bit more things that I would probably poke holes in them being an elite unit than maybe Seahawks fans might.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I had heard you talk about the Josh Jobe piece, and I think that that's valid. I think a lot of folks were, okay, are they going to draft Savon Ravel in the second? There's Zoff Frazier was there a little bit later, was a guy that I thought would have been a good addition. It seems pretty clear they're going to add either Rasul Douglas or Shaquille Griffin as a vet competitor. Like they both visited, one of them most likely assigned. But does it affect your perspective at all that Mike McDonald has talked about Nick Emanwari as being a nickel? That's where in rookie minicamp, that's where he lined up. Mike McDonald was literally standing next to him playing Mike linebacker, talking through, the keys and the reads. And they want to have the option to have Devin Witherspoon and Reek Woolen as their outside corners and have that basically be Nick Emanwari versus Josh Jobe. Are they better off in a secondary with Nick Emanwari in the middle? Are they better off? And depending on matchup, they might switch that up.
I think, two thoughts on that, and I'll start with Emanwari himself. That one, him playing the nickel, I want to give Mike McDonald some benefit of the doubt because he is, I think, one of the smartest defensive minds in football, and he's done a really good job generally of putting all of his players in the right positions, whether it's in Baltimore or whether it's in Seattle. I mean, the move for, Bryant going to safety, I think, kind of solidifies that a little bit. I think moving Emanwari a little bit closer to the line of scrimmage at the nickel kind of circumvents one of his biggest issues, which is he takes really bad angles sometimes, when he's a little bit deeper, and I think he struggles to turn his hips. But I do worry a little bit with him at the nickel if he has the fluidity, the quick feet to really accomplish some of the things that he wants to accomplish, especially in coverage. So that one, I'm a little bit more wait and see. The bigger issue I have, and this is something we saw with the Chiefs last year, they were able to move Trent McDuffie from the nickel and play him more as an outside guy. And he was solid as an outside guy, like still a B-level corner at least. But when he's in the nickel, he's an A-plus player. And that's how I feel about Devin Witherspoon. Like when he's in the nickel, he is a demon. He's one of the best run defenders. He's an incredible blitzer. He's still a very good coverage player. And this isn't, again, to say that he can't play outside. I just worry that you're going to make him an A-plus player from the nickel to like a B-level player on the outside. And maybe I'm wrong on that. It's just I'm always a little bit scared of moving a player away from a spot that he's very clearly shown that he can be like a Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber player.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I absolutely agree with the notion as well. You mentioned before that the Seahawks don't have an ace edge rusher. That's true. Like the Boye Mafe, Derek Hall, both have shown a lot of promise. They're very young. Both had, almost double-digit sack seasons and are coming on, but they don't have that guy that you just have to double. They did not have Uchenna Nwosu for most of last year. He will be back, and then they add DeMarcus Lawrence. And then you've got Byron Murphy, who is coming into his second year. And one of the things, if you look at Byron Murphy's career, whether it's high school, whether it's college, he tends to get significantly better year after year as he adjusts to the level that he's in. Obviously Leonard Williams was an all-pro level player last year. This was a team that I think finished 6th in pressure rate, despite, blitzing, I think 22nd most often. So the Mike McDonald defense, right? How do you feel about the pass rush and what the potential is for that to be continuing to be a productive part of this defense?
I do think it's going to be really good. So even though I had the concern that they don't have an ace, that to me is something that's only probably going to really matter in the playoffs when you really just want to have a guy who can win one-on-one. But kind of like you're talking about, if Byron Murphy can become what like Justin Madubuike was for the Ravens in those Mike McDonald defenses, then that kind of eases my concern here a little bit that they don't have an ace. Because at that point, you would have one of the best interior pass rushing duos in Williams and Murphy. And then you would have a stable of 4 and 5 guys who are, again, not aces, but guys who can get pretty consistently like 8-ish sacks in a season. And the thing I'll say about the edge room, I really like the compilation of body types they have here, like DeMarcus Lawrence and Derek Hall being your bigger, meaner, longer pocket pusher types, I think is really, really nice. Uchenna Nwosu, I think at his best is like, he's one of those guys to me who doesn't have an elite trait necessarily, but he works incredibly hard. His hands are really good and he hustles. Like he's just a very, very good, he's the perfect number 2 type of pass rusher. And then I do think Mafe at his best is your speed actually gets around the edge. So I trust that McDonald is again going to have them pretty consistently playing at a top 10 pressure rate. The minor nitpick is just like, do they have a guy in the playoffs? You hope that it's going to be Byron Murphy.
Yeah, and the other piece to this, Derek, that I wonder if it feels like it was a story before last year and then disappeared last year, which was Mike McDonald played all the best offensive coordinators in Baltimore, faced them, and like one by one just crossed them off the list. And was he the stopper going into the NFC West against Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan? And Kyle Shanahan got him in the first game up in Seattle, but I feel like maybe people didn't pay attention to that first Rams game, the second Rams game was a basically exhibition, but the first game, the Seahawks and Mike McDonald's defense held Matt Stafford, Sean McVay to 7 3-and-outs, which was the most 3-and-outs Sean McVay had since he started with the Rams. They had 283 yards in regulation. Stafford had 219 yards in regulation, a 67 passer rating. They had the fewest amount of rushing yards they'd had, tied for most all year. The amount of things that had to go wrong in that game for the Seahawks to lose that game are kind of an extra point, honestly. Just a missed extra point would have won that game for the Seahawks. And then they go into LA or Santa Clara, sorry. They go into San Francisco, Santa Clara, and hold the 49ers with a healthy Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle and Trent Williams to their lowest amount of yards that season and the lowest at home since 2020. And then they absolutely bottle up Kyler Murray in both games that they played against the Cardinals. So is that a storyline that's just been lost? Do you feel like it's something that still has validity going into this coming season?
I mean, I personally still think Mike McDonald is one of the best defensive play callers in the league. Like, I think sometimes when a guy becomes a head coach, especially, it's funny when we have the offensive guys who become head coaches and then are the play callers and really the architects, we continue to give them a boatload of credit. And it's like the only thing we talk about with their team. With defensive guys, we don't do that as much, weirdly enough, but we absolutely should with Mike McDonald, where he is obviously the architect here and he is the one who is putting everything together. I would say with all of these other NFC West teams in particular, one, you mentioned the Rams game, them putting up a bunch of 3-and-outs against McVay. That is especially impressive to me last year, where the Rams were like the best team at not getting 3-and-outed, actually. Like they were an incredibly efficient stay on the field offense. Could they always convert drives to points? Not necessarily, but they were really good at just not, like they kept themselves in the game. So the fact that the Seahawks did a good job there, I think was super impressive. The entire ethos of the Mike McDonald defense is we are going to stop the run on first down. And then we are going to get you into like 2nd and 9. And we're going to throw some bizarre pressure package at you or some weird like zone blitz or whatever it is. Some sim pressure that is going to heat the quarterback up. And I think the way that he cooks those up, the way that he calls them, they're never too aggressive. It never feels like he's putting his defense in disadvantageous spots. And then you add that on top of the fact that Ernest Jones, I think, glued the entire operation together, both in run defense and in coverage. I do think that they have something pretty special in the way that it's put together. So again, I still have some questions about how the secondary is going to come together, but in terms of like the overall plan and what they want to do, especially in this division, I think they've got a really good thing going. I would worry about them a little bit more like Washington, I think, is a good team, or the Bengals, where the Bengals, doesn't matter if they're running the ball well or not. Like they're going to do the thing that they're going to do. And I think we even saw, Burrow did have some decent games against Mike McDonald in the past. So I think these teams, though, that want to run the ball first, and then if they can't get really pressed in the way that they're able to pass the ball against McDonald, those are the teams that I think he's going to have high success rate against.
Yeah. And just, one last thought there, just sharing some specifics. The Rams scored 13 points in regulation in that game. The 49ers the next week scored 17 points in a game that was, they had just beaten Tampa Bay. They were coming in ready to reestablish themselves. Then the Cardinals score 6 points. Those are 3 consecutive weeks. And then the next time they played a division team was in Arizona, and that was kind of at the point for maybe the division. They held Arizona to 18. And so I do wonder how big of a factor that's going to be coming in. But let's switch sides, because your specialty, I think, is offense, and that's where the most turnover has been. People talk about the Seahawks, rebuilding, transitioning, whatever you want to talk about. The defense is essentially the exact same team as it was last year. The offense, new coordinator, new offensive line coach, new quarterback, new a lot of things. Let's start with the quarterback, because we obviously talked a little bit there. Help us understand that are listening and trying to decipher, okay, Sam Darnold, objectively, he was available as a free agent. The Raiders could have signed Sam Darnold without trading a 3rd round pick. Another team like the Steelers, there's a lot of teams that could have signed Sam Darnold. He doesn't get signed. He goes to the Seahawks. The Raiders willingly trade a 3rd round pick for a guy who's 8 years older and pay him more money. I think by market evaluation, Geno Smith is a better quarterback than Sam Darnold. Fans might not want to hear that, but that's what the market believes. Why? Besides maybe it's only 1 year in Minnesota, what specifically makes Geno Smith a better quarterback than Sam Darnold?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think it's a couple of things. One, Geno Smith is purely as a passer one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the league. I think you could make a case he's the most accurate quarterback in the league. His ball placement to every level of the field is phenomenal. He can truly make every throw on the field. And Sam Darnold's peaks are amazing. His top throws are as good as Geno Smith's. The consistency of what you're getting down to down, I think, is a little bit more up and down. I think Geno generally plays with a little bit better timing than Sam Darnold does. Some of the quote timing that you see from Sam Darnold is him just throwing a dig route because Kevin O'Connell said throw it or I'm gonna bench you. Not literally said that, but
Yeah.
that's just how the offense functions.
Yeah.
And so I think that is part of it. And then I think even for as much turnover issues as Geno Smith has had at times, I think Sam Darnold is even more prone to that. And I think for a lot of last season, we've even seen this before where turnover, specifically interception stuff, can actually be kind of lucky. I remember there was a year where Dak threw 17 interceptions or whatever it was. And people were like, oh my God, Dak Prescott's terrible now. And then he played the exact same way the next year, had the exact same interceptable ball rate, but they just didn't get caught as much. And then he had one of the best passing seasons in the league. And I think Darnold last year just got away with a lot of throws that should have been intercepted and just weren't. And so I think that is a factor. And the last thing I would say, Geno Smith is phenomenal under pressure. He is truly one of the best guys at remaining clear-minded, remaining accurate, finding different little throwing platforms to get to. And so even if he's not a creator outside of the pocket, I think within the pocket, he's really good at managing all of that. Sam Darnold can get a little bit antsy and a little bit throw the ball where he shouldn't, all of that sort of stuff. So I would say those are the major differences between the two quarterbacks.
Yeah, and to put at least a number behind that, just last year where Geno Smith threw more interceptions and, by a lot of measures had some really questionable decisions, Sam Darnold's turnover-worthy play rate, this is via PFF's data, was 3.7%, where Geno Smith was 2.6%. So the numbers can lie in terms of what actually is a turnover versus what should have been or could have been. And I think that's fair. The pressure one's one that's interesting to me. And I want to get into this with you a little bit because I'd heard that. And as I dug into the numbers, at least last year, that did not hold true. At least in the sense that if you're comparing Geno Smith and Sam Darnold, they were under pressure roughly the same amount. Geno Smith was under pressure 38%, 38.5. Sam Darnold was 38. So they were roughly under pressure the same amount. Sam Darnold averaged more yards per attempt, had more touchdowns when under pressure, he had 13 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. Geno Smith had 7 touchdowns to 13 interceptions. Big time throw rate for Sam Darnold, 6.8% in those situations when he's under pressure. Geno Smith, 5.2. This is interesting because it's relative to the stat we just talked about. When under pressure, Geno Smith's turnover-worthy play rate rose to 4.7%. Sam Darnold's was 3.4%. So Sam Darnold's basically as likely to turn the ball over when he's under pressure as when he's not. Geno Smith really jumped up quite a bit. So it's almost, I could keep going on. Like there's something adjusted completion rate, which takes into account drops and things of that nature, throwaways. Sam Darnold was actually more accurate in this regard. 69.8% adjusted completion rate versus 67% when under pressure. So I kind of look at, is a player different when under pressure? How different are they when under pressure? And I could go through all these numbers with you, but I don't want to bore you. At least for last year, Geno Smith had a much bigger variance when he was under pressure versus when he was not than Sam Darnold did. I'm curious if that's intriguing at all to you.
It is a little bit. I mean, I think part of it last year to me is the context in which these two players were playing in. Like, Darnold had the luxury of Justin Jefferson is down there somewhere, Jordan Addison is down there somewhere, and even TJ Hawkinson, I think, is a better tight end than anyone the Seahawks was fielding. And so I know DK Metcalf is a nice player, and Tyler Lockett was still solid. He's not quite as good as those two. And I would also say there was a degree of confidence that Darnold was allowed to play with when you have a guy like Kevin O'Connell, who is so obviously teaching a well-constructed offense to him in a way that I just don't think we got out of Ryan Grubb last year with the Seahawks. So I just think that there was a level of confidence that Darnold was allowed to play with the players that he was playing with and the coach that he was playing with. Whereas Geno, I do think it's very fair to say that he was pressing at times last year and was doing some uncharacteristically stupid things at times. But I also think that the nature of the way that the offense was constructed, and with them consistently being in bad down and distances because of the run game, he was almost forced to play that way in a lot of times. And so that is the other thing about why context is important with quarterbacks, is I think we a lot of times purely view it through like, okay, how good are the guys that he's throwing to? But a lot of the times it's like, well, what is the context in which like the game is at that he is being forced to play? And like Geno, I think, was made to be more aggressive. And if he didn't make some of these throws downfield into tight coverage, he was going to be in trouble. I also think on film, at least, Geno Smith now has a track record of 3 years of being pretty good under pressure. Darnold has one that is not even as good as what I think Geno Smith has put on film the past few years. So to me, it's a little bit of track record and a little bit of, contextual stuff.
We were talking to Derrik Klassen of the Athletic Football Show, and awesome stuff as we're going through the Seahawks kind of local perception versus national perception. So one of the other things that I hear a lot is, well, Sam Darnold had a much better situation than what Geno Smith had. And OCs aside, we'll get into OCs in a second because I want to talk about that change. But offensive line, for the first 7 weeks, you had Christian Darrisaw, and then he's gone. And you're playing with like nobody, and then Cam Robinson. I don't know what you think of Cam Robinson. I think about him as essentially a replacement level guy.
Yeah, not good. Not good.
Okay.
There was a funny thing going on last year where once they traded for him, it was like, oh, this is a good move to replace Darrisaw. And it was like, it was their only move and they had to do something, but like, he's not solving anything here. Like, this isn't good.
No. And they also have a pretty questionable interior line. Dalton Risner and Brad, like they had a questionable interior line, and then they had a decent right tackle and O'Neal. The Seahawks had Charles Cross, who is a decent to above average left tackle. They had a questionable interior line, and then they had a mess at right tackle playing, Stone Forsythe, and George Fant got injured, and Mike Jarrell, and all this stuff before Abe Lucas came back. So in some ways, it felt like some mirror images of those two offensive lines. And you do have some decent skill positions with JSN and DK Metcalf. They're not Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson, but it's not exactly a barren room there. So when you look at the differences in situation, talk to me a little bit more about like what were the key things that you saw were different there?
I think one, Justin Jefferson almost counts for like multiple good players because he's the best receiver in the league. Like it's just so good. It changes the math in a way that I think very, very few pass catchers do. So I think that is certainly part of it. The offensive line stuff is definitely fair. I think that Minnesota offensive line was a lot worse than people realize. The only difference I would say between those two, I think in terms of the quality of individual players, it probably wasn't that different between them and Seattle. Like their propensity to just get beat by the defensive tackle across for them was probably about the same. I would say that Minnesota's pass protection plans for most of the year up until that Rams game where they just got hammered was significantly better than what we saw from the Seahawks. Like I think the Seahawks were putting their already not very good offensive line in pretty compromising positions and not tying the run game together with the passing game very well, and not tying their play action game well, all that well. And so even if their general pressure rates were kind of the same, I do think that there were a lot more instances where Darnold could just get a 5-step play action, 7-step play action, and just have a sea of space to operate with in a way that I think at Geno Smith, just didn't have as many opportunities like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to talk in just a second about the coaching change and the scheme change and what that can look like. Before we do that, we're talk about the personnel on the offensive line. So obviously Cross, for the Seahawks offensive line to be better, it feels like there's at least two things that have to happen. One, the personnel has to take a step forward and improve. Two, the way that they're deployed has to improve. I may add a third, which is how often they're being asked to protect and passing has to change as well. The ratio has to change. So if you look at Abe Lucas coming off surgery last year, missed most last season, coming in, at this point, fully healthy, has the potential to play a full season at right tackle. That seems like a big difference. Charles Cross in this scheme already took a big leap last year. The Seahawks are betting that Gray Zabel is going to be better than Laken Tomlinson. That doesn't feel like a crazy bar to clear. Ola Timmy was basically a league average center last year. He was not, once he came in, not a terrible player. And then you've got basically a pile at right tackle to figure out between Satawa Lamea, Anthony Bradford, Christian Haynes, who excelled in zone scheme at UConn, and Bryce Cabledew, who was a 6th-round pick. One of those guys comes out of the wash at right guard. It feels personnel-wise a little bit more optimistic than it was coming into last year. Do you buy that?
I actually do. I think the thing for me is just, I think between the scheme change, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and adding a 1st-round pick at guard, I think a lot of people seem to think the ceiling is higher for the offensive line than I might, but I do think the floor is much higher. Like you said, Zabel, it's going to be a hard transition going from FCS to NFL, but if he only has to be better than Laken Tomlinson in year one, it's not a very high bar to clear, like you said. At right guard, I think that's obviously the biggest question mark. We'll see with a lot of those guys, but I'm glad you bring up Ola Timmy, because I remember during the offseason I did a different Seahawks pod, and people were talking about, are they going to sign Drew Dahlman? And I was like, why? Like Dahlman is a better player than Olu Timmy, but like at the cost that you're going to pay him, he's not that much better. And so it wasn't worth it. And Olu, I think, fits what they're going to do with a lot of the zone stuff. So I think if they can just go from, assuming relatively healthy tackle play, if they can go from, I don't know, the 28th best offensive line to the 19th, I think that does significantly change what this offense is going to be able to do. And they're not going to be in the constant 2nd and 9s after a dead run the way that they were last year.
Yeah, it's interesting, Derek. They once Olu Timmy, Abe Lucas entered, and then Satawa Lamea replaced Anthony Bradford. They were the 7th best run team in the NFL after week 11, essentially, which, they still didn't run very often, but they were all of a sudden
the problem.
they were a competent team on the offensive line once those changes were made, and it feels like they have a chance to step forward. So let's now talk about the scheme. And I have this thing. I wonder, like, for years, I look at the 49ers in the Seahawks division, and I'm like, God, they've got Trent Williams and a bunch of Jags. Like, that is not a very good offensive line. And year after year, they look like world beaters. And I've heard other folks who I respect who analyze, and they're like, the talent's not there. That scheme has allowed them to kind of hide some of those deficiencies. Clint Kubiak comes from, like, you could argue Shanahan comes from that, or Kubiak comes from whichever you want to say. Is there a reason to think that the Seahawks won't benefit from this scheme change? Maybe not as much as in Shanahan, but maybe to some extent similarly?
I do think there will be some benefit. Obviously, with Shanahan, it's not just the general idea of the scheme. It's that he pieces together things and formationally makes things look weird and uses motion in a way that almost no other coordinator does. And I think with Kubiak, there's a lot of to be determined there. I think he did an okay job in New Orleans, but I think betting that he's going to be anywhere close to those guys is probably a little bit optimistic. The thing I will say, though, is last year, I think what we saw with Ryan Grubb is that was just not a mature NFL offense, like in terms of their protection plans, in terms of piecing the run game together with the passing game, understanding that we need to run a certain amount to really make this thing work. Like there were just times where they abandoned it way too early last year. So I do think if Kubiak can just give you a baseline level of competency as an NFL structure, I do think that actually goes a long way. It's just that I think sometimes we do a little bit too much of, oh, this, Shanahan's zone scheme is going to fix everything and it's going to make the offensive line look better. When we just had last year where Bobby Slowick and the Houston Texans offensive line was one of the worst units in the league and they were completely terrible. And I think that you can argue that the Miami Dolphins, even for as much success as they have had on offense, have been a pretty bad running team for a long time because they have struggled to really put together the offensive line in a consistent way. So I do think it will raise their level a little bit. I just think I'm a little bit more wait and see on what the actual ceiling for that is.
Well, so let's just get in maybe some more absolutes, and you can push back if you don't think these are. The Seahawks are going to run the ball more often than they did last year as a percentage of their plays. Does that seem?
It would be hard not to.
It would be hard not to. Just by that change alone, you will have less pass protection snaps, less potential for pressure, those kinds of things. For that to work, the run offense has to be competent. How do you feel about, going from Andy Dickerson and Scott Huff? Andy Dickerson had never been an offensive line coach, like a head offensive line coach before he coached here. Scott Huff, his first time coaching in the NFL, coming with Ryan Grubb, to John Benton, who's been doing it for 17 years, was the first offensive line coach with Kyle Shanahan down in San Francisco. Rick Dennison, who's been obviously doing this for a very long time, Justin Outen and others. They invested a lot of coaching know-how in the run game and in the offensive line. Do you feel like the outside zone, the under center game, the play action game, that all of those things can help alleviate some of the pressure on the offensive line and also maybe get this running game going a little bit more?
I think absolutely, just because it's simpler. Like it sounds dumb, and I think in an ideal world, we actually are moving towards in the NFL run game, you want to be a little bit more diverse. You want to be a little bit more downhill, pull some guys, all that jazz. But if you are trying to go from we don't know what to do with running the ball the way that the Seahawks were at last year, I think it's totally fine to go into a little bit more of a simpler world and just try to really live in more of this outside zone stuff the way that they're going to do with Kubiak. And Dennison is a really good hire to have in terms of, Kubiak is still very young in the way that he's doing this. And Dennison obviously worked with the older Kubiak, Gary Kubiak. He worked under him in Houston. Dennison was also there. I want to say that, do you remember that 2014 Ravens season where Justin Forsett was randomly leading the league in rushing?
Yes.
Dennison was there for that team, and they did a lot of outside zone. So he is a very good guy to bring into, let's just do this at an adult, mature level. And so, again, I do think that they'll be able to bring that to the run game. And so if they can just be, I know you mentioned they were the 7th best rushing offense for a little bit towards the back half of last year. If they can just be the 15th best rushing offense, but consistently be that and actually run the ball and want that to be part of their game plan, I think that's going to go a longer way in making this offensive line better than even the personnel upgrades are probably going to.
Well, and if you look at the Saints from last year where Kubiak, Benton, Dennison were all there, obviously crazy amounts of injuries, especially on the offensive line, all along the offense in general. They still finished 16th in the NFL in time to pressure, which was significantly better than where the Seahawks were last year. And I think time to pressure is an interesting one. By the way, that is a place where the Vikings and Seahawks lines deviate. And that's, I think, where the truth comes out. The Seahawks were giving up a lot more quick pressure than a team like the Vikings were, and that would be different for Sam Darnold to deal with. But Why are you a little bit less or a little bit more skeptical about Clint Kubiak than other young offensive coordinators getting their third chance in the league?
I think with this specific style of offense, I think the the well has run dry a little bit in terms of the guys who are truly creative and pushing the envelope a little bit. And that's not to say that Kubiak can't be one of those guys. It's just that I think that we're digging deeper and deeper into that. And I didn't see anything that from the Saints last year that was like, man, he's really going to be on the cutting edge. Like it was decently put together, and I didn't think it was embarrassing or anything, but I think the general structure of the offense kind of allows you to do that at sometimes. Like even Bobby Slowick in his first year, even though they weren't a good running team, they were trying to do it. You could see some of the play action stuff come together. Every now and then, some of his motion stuff would look decent. And you were like, okay, if you can just play the hits in this offense, you can look like a relatively competent play caller. And with Kubiak, we just haven't seen it that much. So again, I think he's going to raise the level above what Grubb was doing in terms of being a mature NFL offense. I just think that this is one of those guys that I didn't see anything last year that makes me believe that this is a ceiling raising play caller. And again, he might be, but I'm just, I think, a little bit more in, let's kind of see him prove it first, especially with, I think with this group of skill players outside of Kenneth Walker, it's hard for me to find like who is the explosives guy. And I think that that is always the challenge, especially in the modern NFL, is finding those explosives.
That's the thing I want to talk about with you next. You talked about explosives. We're talking to Derrik Klassen of the Athletic Football Show. So Kenneth Walker certainly has that in his game. Zach Charbonnet, had that to some extent last year when he was starting. He had probably the most explosive plays for them last year, partially because of Kenneth Walker's injuries. You mentioned you don't think Elijah Arroyo is going to play as much. Tell me why.
It's more that I just kind of envision Fant and Arroyo having a lot of overlap in terms of the way that they want to play. They are both guys who I think can run down the seam. They can run across on some of the short stuff and like catch those drag routes and stuff, or just those quick release routes on like the boot stuff that they are going to do a lot of in this offense, where it's just a lot of the quick catch and run type stuff. So I just envision Arroyo and Fant having a lot of role overlap. And then as far as the tight end two goes, maybe they do want to have both of those guys on the field and really be explosive that way. But I just think Barner is probably their best blocker and also probably just their best security blanket type of guy. And I actually think in the red zone, he's actually kind of decent. Like I actually really like AJ Barner. So maybe that's what a lot of this is I just think he's like a pretty good role player.
Yeah.
And I think Arroyo is a guy who he wasn't very productive for a lot of his time in college. He was a guy who it took him a while to get there. And you can even just see in the way that he played in college, little bit of an awkward mover at times, even though he's incredibly athletic. And just, I think the way that he tried to locate the ball at times at Miami was a little bit uncomfortable, a little bit, not natural. And so he feels to me like a guy who is going to take a year or two before I think we see some of his best ball.
So when the Seahawks signed Marquez Valdez-Scantling for a couple $1 million or whatever, I didn't think much of it, and I went back to look at his tape from last year. Obviously, Buffalo was not a great experience, and then he goes to New Orleans. I don't know how much of his time in New Orleans you watched, but I was like, who is this guy? Where was this? This is the best stretch of his career.
He had their best play every week for some reason. I remember that stretch of the Saints season where we had already kind of given up on them because it was like, okay, they were just dropping guys like flies. And I think we had all realized by like week 7, the first 2 weeks were fake, all that jazz. But there was like a 4-week stretch with the Saints where I was like, you would look up at red zone and it's like, why is he in the end zone again? Like, how did that happen? And so he's a funny player because he really only does one thing, which is line up on the outside and run fast and beat guys down the field. And every now and then his ball skills are going to fail you. But I do think in an offense that has now just lost DK Metcalf, and you're going to need that role player, particularly in this offense. I actually did love the signing. Like, it's not sexy, but you kind of need this player in the offense.
Yeah, it was shocking to me. He had 4 touchdowns and 7 starts, which was tied his career high for a full season. And when he came here, he said, when I asked him, like, why come here? He's like, I got coached better than I've ever been coached before. I unlocked something I hadn't had before. And so I came here because of Clint Kubiak. So I think it's unwise to put too much emphasis on Marquez Valdez-Scantling being your savior at X, but at least it's intriguing. Torrey Horton obviously is intriguing as well. 5th-round picks, be careful about betting too much there. So last thing I wanted to ask you, Derrik, and then I've kept you way longer than we agreed to, but I appreciate your time. The perception of the Seahawks versus the rest of the NFC West. I could use your help on this because generally speaking, odds are like 7.5 or 8 wins for the Seahawks this year is kind of the over-under around. And typically the 49ers are up at 10.5. Rams are maybe 9.5. Help me understand on both of those teams. I look at the Rams, and Matt Stafford had a really good playoff run. He was really not very good most of last year, at least by what I could see. And if I went back and I looked at his numbers for the last 3 years, including like 2 years ago, he was very good, I thought. He, as far as EPA per play, over the last 3 years, he's 19th in the NFL. He's like around Kirk Cousins level in that. EPA plus CPOE, completion rate over expected, also 19th. Like, help me understand why everyone just assumes that a team that had the 15th ranked DVOA offense and the what was it? The 23rd ranked, 26th ranked DVOA defense, why that is so clearly much better than what Seattle's running out there.
So I think with them, there's just a lot of faith in Sean McVay, which is earned. Like he's one of the best coaches in the NFL. And I think Stafford, we've seen at his peak, even if we didn't get as much of it last year, is still one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And at least for me personally, I think Davante Adams kind of solves a lot of what they had last year. Whereas I think last year they were not a very explosive offense. Like they ran the ball efficiently and then Stafford would give you these moments. But I think they struggled to have a player who was like, man, we need a bucket here. Can we go get a bucket? And like Puka Nacua can do that underneath, but he's like a very particular kind of player. Davante Adams is like, line up over there, run the dig route, you're going to get open. And I do think that unlocks something different in the offense. I'm glad you mentioned the defense, though. I think we all think that defense is way better than it probably is. Like the young players up front, it's super exciting, right? Like Jared Verse is cool and Fisk and all this stuff. And obviously what they did to the Vikings in the playoff, I think sticks in our minds. They were a pretty bad unit for a lot of the year because the secondary was horrible. And the secondary is mostly what it was last year. And maybe they'll trade for Jalen Ramsey. We'll see. I think that is still very much on the table. But until they do that, I think they are a pretty shaky unit on that side of the ball. So I actually think this is a division where I really don't want to pick a winner. I truly think that every single team, I would put it like 9.5 wins, and I think that they could all do it. Which I think goes to your point of like, I think it's a little bit shocking that the Seahawks are kind of under all of them. I guess it's also just that I think we live in a world now where if you're going to bet on team that has elite defense or potentially elite offense, almost every time people are going to lead towards elite offense and the better quarterback. And I do think that the Rams have the potential to reach that in a way that no other team in the division does.
Yeah, it's like, speaking of shocking, it was shocking to me that the Seahawks scored more points per game than the Rams, had more yards per game than the Rams, averaged more yards per carry than the Rams. I would have not guessed that. And I also like the 49ers, who are getting this huge benefit of the doubt. They had the worst unit in the division. Their defense was 26th in the NFL in DVOA. And they just added some rookies to it.
It still might be really bad. Yeah.
I don't quite understand that. And maybe it'll be really good, but combining what we talked about before with what Mike McDonald's done to those coordinators over the last couple of years and the defense they're returning, I could argue that the Seahawks defense is the most reliable unit in the entire division.
I think that's not a crazy argument to make. I would still probably say I have an outsized amount of faith for Sean McVay that like they will just figure something out. But I do think Mike McDonald is pretty close to that tier in terms of, is this guy going to get his side of the ball to play the way that they're supposed to play? And I do think that that's true. And like you said, they brought back mostly the same guys. And if anything, have added a couple of more pieces, obviously with Emmett Wari and signing DeMarcus Lawrence. So Now that you say it, I think if I did have to put a confidence meter on this side of the ball in this division will be the best, it might be the Seahawks defense. Actually, I think with the offense, I'm a lot of wait and see.
Yes, there's a lot of question marks there. Derrik, thank you so much for spending all this time. Unbelievable to get your insights and expertise. Hopefully we informed each other a little bit on this and move the discourse a little bit forward. So what can folks look forward to? I'm guessing I talked to Robert. He's taking some time off, well earned. I'm guessing you're going to take some time off. What's going to be coming up for you maybe after your time off? Do you have any idea?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me. This was fantastic. Do not feel bad about at all for keeping me for an hour. This was like I said, I love talking about this team. It used to be because of Geno. Now it's because of Mike McDonald, but there's always a reason. So I'm very happy to be here and I appreciate it. For the show, we're still actually, even though Robert's taking some time off, going to have pretty consistently 4 shows a week because we're kind of banking some mailbag episodes that we're going to be building up. I'll be hosting 1 or 2 in his absence to kind of cover for him and all that jazz. So we're still going to have a pretty full schedule feed. It's just going to look and feel a little bit different than it usually does.
Awesome. Well, sincere thank you to you and Robert for keeping me company on my walks with my dog and hikes and so forth. So appreciate you and hope to have you back on. It was great talking to you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. That was Derrik Klassen of the Athletic Football Show. As good as it gets, folks. He and Robert, when they're going on, honestly, I assess who I'm listening to based off of how much time they put into it, how much bias they have. And those two will absolutely challenge each other. They'll listen to new information. They will cite evidence as opposed to just vibes. And they know each and every team in the NFL as well as anybody. And so love having a chance to talk to Derrik. Obviously spent a lot of time talking to Robert, and hopefully we'll have a lot more of those guys on the show. I was so excited about this show because I really wanted to bridge this gap. As I said, I listen to those guys regularly, and I hear how pained Derrik has been about the Seahawks offseason and some of the things that he feels. I just wanted to talk to him about it. It's nothing to do with putting on a good show or not. Hopefully it was a good show for all of you, but I just wanted to kind of pierce some of the takes that I feel like were a little bit off, or learn why I'm missing something. And I'll tell you this, so much rests on Sam Darnold. It's just the reality. I am higher on the combination of what the change for OC, offensive line coach, scheme, personnel is going to do, and the fit of Sam Darnold in this offense than I think almost anybody else is. I'm pretty bullish. I also think that, as you heard me kind of make the case for today, I think that the floor is so much higher than the national perspective is about the Seahawks because of the defense, which everybody seems to forget about. And it was not that long ago that everyone was saying that Mike McDonald is the greatest defensive mind in the game. He shuts down all the best OCs, whether it's Andy Reid, Kyle Shanahan, Mike McDaniel, bring them all. He was going to shut him down. If anything, Sean McVay was a guy that kind of got him in his last year in Baltimore. And then you heard me rattle off what he did to Sean McVay last year when he came up to Seattle. He put him in a box. So I think that this team, by the way, this defense was 19th in the NFL in takeaways. I think that was abnormally low. You give this offense, which had the worst starting field position in the NFL, the fewest plus field position possessions, meaning they got the ball on the opponent's side of the 50. They had the fewest of those possessions in the NFL last year. I just think there was a lot of things working against them. And you also have a defense that was facing the hardest slate of offenses last year. I'm not convinced that this team is bad. I will keep my mind open. I will keep my eyes open. I just don't see it that way. And I had done this at the end of last year. The best units in the NFC West by EPA, okay, by EPA per play. The Seahawks, number 1, 10th overall. It's actually tied with the Cardinals. The Cardinals offense was 10th overall in EPA per play. So the Seahawks defense, the Cardinals offense. The 49ers offense was 11th. The Rams offense was 15th. The Seahawks offense was 18th. So the Seahawks had the 1st and the 5th best units in the NFC West last year by EPA per play. After the Seahawks offense, the Rams defense was 23rd. The Cardinals defense was 24th. The 49ers defense was 26th. If you do the same thing by DVOA, the 49ers had the best unit by DVOA. The offense was 9th in DVOA. The Seahawks defense was tied for 2nd with 10th. So they were 10th in EPA per play. They were 10th in DVOA. The Rams offense was 10th. So this is where I think you get a little bit more of why people are bullish on the 49ers and the Rams. The 49ers offense and the Rams offense were essentially by DVOA equivalent to the Seahawks defense last year. And some people will say they think that the 49ers offense and the Rams offense will be better this year. I'm not as convinced about that. So that's another piece there. After that, the Cardinals offense was 11th in DVOA. So you have this cluster where 3 of the 4 teams in the NFC West have their strength is on the offense. The Seahawks are the one team where their strength was on the defense. You continue from there. The 49ers D was 13th. The Cardinals D was 14th. The Seahawks offense was 18th. The Rams D was 26th. It was the worst unit in the NFC West last year in DVOA. So can the Seahawks offense be better than 18th in DVOA? Can the Seahawks defense be better than 10th in DVOA? I think the answer is yes for both of those. And I actually think it is more likely that they're going to be better than that they're going to be worse than that this year. Now, the one thing that's a caveat with DVOA is it's opponent adjusted. That is what OA and DVOA stands for. So when you're facing lesser opponents, you have to do more against them to qualify. So maybe it'll all even out in the wash. But I am more bullish, as you would expect maybe, for someone who does as much content about Seahawks as I do. I'm just more bullish on the Seahawks than the average Joe out there. So Tony Bag of Donuts has been a member for 9 months on the super chat. He says, Brian, you killed it on Brock and Salk this week. Well, that is very kind of you, considering that I butchered Torrey Horton's name at the end. I said Tony Horton. And if you don't know who Tony Horton is, he is the guy who I do his workouts, the P90X workouts. I still do those, like body weight, push-ups, pull-ups, all that kind of stuff. Had a brain freeze. And I also, when they said, what do you think are 3 moves, like the next 3 big moves? I blew it because, of course, I wanted to say trade Noah Fant. I still think there's a chance they're going to trade Noah Fant. I forgot to say it, but I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. It's always fun being on with Brock and Salk. By the way, since we're talking about working out, I'm not one that typically talks about my birthday or make this about me, but I want to offer, if anyone wants to do this challenge with me, we are June 11th. I will turn 50. Yes, I will turn 50 on June 11th. So a few weeks away. I'm going to try to do a Pete Carroll thing for the next few years. We'll see if I can keep doing it. I'm going to try to do 50 straight push-ups without stopping on my birthday. And so if you want to join a challenge with me, either your age or 50 or whatever you want to do, start getting ready for it now. I haven't decided whether I'll broadcast it or not. Maybe I will. It might be like humiliating to do that, but it might be fun too. So I will do that. And then every year, hopefully after that, I'll do 51 straight next year, 52, and kind of keep going up with my age, the way Pete Carroll used to throw the football to match his age. We'll see when I can no longer do that. Tony Bag of Donuts has also gifted 5 Hawk Blogger memberships. Thank you for your generosity, Tony. I really appreciate it. Adam Gregg has been a member for 3 months. Adam, it's so great to have you for all this time. He says, great show, Brian. Appreciate all the content. Well, I'm glad you liked it, man. I genuinely like, this is one of the true treats of the profession I've now moved into, is when I'm listening to a podcast about football and about the Seahawks and I want to talk to that person, I have a chance in hell of maybe getting them on the show. That is fun. It's fun. I love talking football. And I love learning from people that I think are really smart. And I think Derrick's one of the folks that's quite smart. So with that, a couple programming notes. So I got a buddies weekend coming up. I'm going to actually leave here in a little bit. Tomorrow morning, I'm not going to do a live show, but I do have a show waiting to debut, a video waiting to debut. The interview I did with Gray Zabel and Jalen Sundell's former offensive line coach at North Dakota State University. I think you're going to want to hear it. It was a lot of fun. So that'll debut. It'll premiere tomorrow morning. Let's see when. When will that debut? It will debut. When's it scheduled? Well, you know what? Come on, make this easier on me, YouTube. 8 a.m. 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. And, you know, the funny thing here, I'm going to share my screen because so I was very proud of this design work that I did. And then I fully realized that neither Jalen Sundell or Gray Zabel probably have any idea what this is in reference to. Probably most of you don't have any idea what this is in reference to. That's how old I am. So Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, back when Keanu Reeves was actually a comedic actor. And that was fun. It was fun trying to recreate this design. And I personally am really hoping that, nothing against Olu, I really like, I'd be happy for Olu to be great, 100% for sure. But part of me just wants to see Gray and Jalen get a chance to play next to each other for years to come. I think that would be a cool story to follow, and I would enjoy it. So that's going to debut tomorrow at 8 a.m. Be there. You can watch it all together. There will be live chat because it's a premiere. You can all watch it at the same time and enjoy it. Sunday, I think I probably won't do a show. I'll still be away with my buddies. There's a chance I'll do a late show if for some reason I really feel like it. But my best guess is I probably will skip Sunday and then be back with you on Monday. So if you haven't given the show a like and click subscribe, please do. If you haven't given the show a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, I would really appreciate it. I'm actually looking up Apple Podcasts to see if we've moved the rating. We are at 4.6. Man, if we could get like 50 more 5-star reviews, we could really raise that rating. I would really appreciate it. If you don't think it's worth a 5-star review, that's totally fine. But could you let me know why before you give it lower than 5 stars? I would really, really appreciate it. Latest reviews are nice. I'm almost embarrassed to read them, but here's one. It says from Casil Mack, says, Brian has worked his tail off to go from a fan to NFL credentialed reporter. His work allows me to just sit back and enjoy the fruits of his labor. Everything is always first class, insightful, and informative. Wow. Well, if you want to make me smile and feel good about myself, I will not argue. I will not fight that at all. Okay, folks, that'll do it for this episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I hope you had a fun time. I loved it. Can't wait to talk to Derrik again. I will see you all soon. Until next time, I'm Brian Nemhauser. Have a great Friday.